everyone. Welcome to the IRMS Scotland Perth Kinross Knowledge Share webinar. I'm Shona Dunning. I am the Information Governance Advisor at Edinburgh Napier University. And myself and Claire Boyle will be your hosts this afternoon. So just a quick welcome to you all, and please do encourage you to use the chat facility, which I notice a couple of people have already said hello. If you want to ask any questions throughout the event, if you could pop them into the questions tab, then that makes it easier for us to see them rather than them being stuck in the chat. And then we shall endeavour to get your questions answered as we go along. So over to Claire, who will introduce today's speakers.
Fab, thank you very much, Shona. So yeah, I'm Claire Boyle. I'm a records manager at Historic Environment Scotland, and I'm very pleased today to have joining us Donald Henderson and Khopolo Jamangile joining us from Perth Kinross Council. Donald has been with the council for 30 years, I believe, and is currently DPO and Information Governance Manager, and will be talking us through the ROPA that he's created and implemented. Khopolo has been there for about 7 years. He's programme manager leading on some of the records management projects that are going on at the council just now, and is going to talk us through how he spearheaded the design and implementation of records management on SharePoint. So yeah, I will hand over to you both. Thank you very much.
Okay. Right, just a minute, I'll share my screen. And do that. Okay, this started at the last meeting as someone asking me, could they see what I'd done for register processing activities in lists? So I've sort of morphed it a wee bit into actually how you do it, and what actually the ROPA is almost incidental, but stick with me. Hopefully you'll follow it. Okay, so lists in SharePoint have actually always been there. Most people have ignored them gently, but they are there. Recently, we've got some increases in functionality, and we've also had the introduction of the Lists app for Teams, which now allows us to talk about a list in lists for a team in Teams. But hey, thanks, Microsoft. So there's a list that you all know and love. That's a document library list, but it's a list, and you can do stuff with it. Not a lot of stuff, but regardless, it's a list, and lists is how SharePoint functions, just that you get to do other things as well. So a list is very like a simple spreadsheet or maybe a database, but without the locking issues. It can be sorted, filtered, grouped. It can be private or published. You can publish it as read-only or edit, just like most things in SharePoint. And it can be exported to Excel, and you can embed a document or a hyperlink in a record, which is quite nice. And that's something I'll show you towards the end. Okay, that was the entire presentation. No, now it's all the examples. So here is a bit of our existing ROPA. It's a spreadsheet, and if I open that, you will see the very boring things that most people have in their register processing activities: title, whereabouts in the council it belongs to, who the owner is, and it goes on, come on, and on, and on, and on, and on, and on, and is a fairly unmanageable spreadsheet. There, it's the last one, column A, B, so 27. So not very pretty, but if we go to Teams instead, and we say, actually, I'd quite like to use the Lists app, please. Okay, and save that. And Lists now appears as a tab in Teams, but because I'm running it, it says, do you want to create a list or do you want to add an existing list? So we're going to create a new one from scratch. There's some examples here. They're worth a look. They're prettier than they are functional, but that's Microsoft for you. And I want to do it from Excel, and I want to do it from information management, lists. And there's our ROPA. Next. As a wee think, my spreadsheet's only got about 50 lines in it. My real one's got about 400 and odd, but for speed of showing you this. So there it started to try and create the list for you, tells you what the columns are, shows you what the data is. Nicely, it says, well, that's a single line of text at the moment, but I know there's only 4 possible entries there. So let's call it a choice. And you can mess around with all of these. Something I don't like is you finish up with this interesting double scroll bar here. So that one scrolls in the list and this one scrolls in the screen. And eventually, if you do them both, you get to the next button. Thanks, Microsoft. Next. So we'll just call that demo. There's the description. The color and the icon, neither Khopolo nor I have ever worked out where the icon appears, but we reckon if you publish this somehow or other, it maybe comes out, don't call it demo, it maybe comes out somewhere, and you get to choose which color the icon is. Isn't that exciting? Anyway, create. Chugs away for a few seconds whilst it works out what my 50 records look like. Talk to amongst yourselves. If anyone's got any questions, punt them into the comments. I'm not actually looking at the comments at the moment. I haven't quite worked out where they are. Oh, there they are. Right. So here's our list. And ROPA now appears as a tab up at the top. And we can move around this quite happily. It goes over there. We can scroll up and down it, and we'd be able to search in it. And if we wanted to edit it, any particular record, we could do that. And there is everything that's in the record. And intriguingly, it goes field 1, column 2, column 3, column 4, column 5, column 6, which personally I find quite hard to follow, but that's just me. Interesting question there. I don't know the answer to that. I'll have a wee think about it. Okay, so we can do this with a list, and that's nice, and it's nice and easy. Whee! If it was that easy, we'd all be doing it, but actually it is that easy, so why aren't you all doing it? If we go across to SharePoint now, because this is the SharePoint view of the same site, and into site contents, see that we've got the ROPA here. Ooh. And I can view it in SharePoint too. And quite excitingly, it appears in the navigation as well, and you can control that from the navigation. So if you're in the documents and you just want to go to, where'd it go? Okay, that's interesting. It's also interesting that I've lost my settings. Isn't that exciting? I love SharePoint Online. It always keeps me amused. However, what you actually wanted to know was how I did the ROPA, and you've seen how I did the ROPA. The one other thing we do, however, is slightly different, and this is my list for data breaches. No, DPIAs, impact assessments. So one of the things you can do is you can sort it and group it. So when we go into it, there's 3 of us, you've probably realized, we can go in and say, well, where are all the ones I'm working on? There they are. And you can color code bits and fields depending on the value. That's done using format current view. And here is the bit I really like, because that shifts the level of the functionality. I can go to the folder and look at the documents associated with that, which I think is fantastic, because otherwise I'm sitting with 150 DPIAs and 150 folders, and I'm trying to manage them and look at the folders at the same time. And if we just edit that entry, you'll see that when you create a folder column, there's a space for the URL and a space for text. And all we do in the text is put an X. You can put the entire name of the folder if you want. It just takes up more room on the screen when you're looking at it. So that is that.
There is a question that came through from Paul, who was asking, in terms of the ROPA content, what approach did you take for coming up with your categories of personal data?
We didn't. I don't think it actually says categories of data anywhere. It's just describe it. I don't think we tried to categorize it. I have yet to see anybody's ROPA template that is perfect, including the ICOs. And I suspect we'll all be amending them slightly as the years go by. I changed ours to say, okay, what country is this stuff in? Somewhere in the last year, because realized we hadn't actually caught that, because we hadn't thought it necessary when we were starting this in 2018. But I think other things will come up, and we'll just keep amending them, and everyone's will be slightly different, and no one's will be perfect.
Okay, that's it for questions at the moment.
Okay.
If anybody thinks of anything, please do feel to jot it down whilst we crack on with Khopolo. Khopolo, you're on mute as well, just to add to the fun and games.
Afternoon, everybody. Apologies for that. At some point in the next year, I will learn how to unmute myself. I am going to try and talk about our electronic document management system and how we came about with that, and how far we've got with it, and some of the issues that we have encountered, and some of the things that I think we would like in the future. So if I start over here, please let me know if you can see my presentation, because I'm sharing on two different screens and I'm not sure which one is appearing. So in terms of our EDMS system, we are now at the position where we're doing it on SharePoint Online. However, we've had, I think, 2, if not 3 different iterations of this. At some point, we were doing it on SharePoint 2010, and then Microsoft came along to say that SharePoint 2010 would be retired. And then we decided we were going to do it on SharePoint 2016 because we had a license to that until 2025. And then our entire IT system changed to Office 365. So we're now at a stage where we've implemented this on Office 365. So if you have questions as I go along, please type them in and I'll pick up on them. Things I'm going to try and cover are the building blocks and design principles for EDMS. I'm going to try and demo to you an EDMS site and show you how we close files and put them into retention. I'm also going to try and work through how we do disposition. And then I'm going to talk about how or what we think we might be able to do in the future with the EDMS system as it stands.
Sorry, Khopolo, just to interrupt you. We're getting a kind of a strange view. There's a request if you can make it a bit bigger.
Okay.
As in, we're not getting your presentation view. We're getting all the ribbon and everything.
Okay. I think because my presentation has appeared in the other screen, I will try and turn the other screen off. Not that one either. I don't. Sorry, I'm going to start this again and see if I can start with.
I was going to say, if we've got any live storm experts, in the comments would always be welcome.
Yes, please.
Yeah, if you have two screens, you have to share the other screen, because what's going to happen is something else would enable, and then you will not have a view of the questions and the ones. But that's okay. That should be okay, because that means you're in presentation mode.
Okay, so if I share my second screen, Maria, then.
Yep, but go on presentation mode first.
Okay. Okay, and I will always say that I love technology. It takes exact good moments to. Right, is that better?
Perfect.
Okay. So, in terms of the building blocks of our EDMS, we decided to make it simple and based on current understood practice within our organization. We were aiming at making files organized by functions performed by the teams rather than a sort of universal approach. We decided against applying content labels and classification across the board, and we were aiming at doing this at a sort of micro level and applying it to teams. And we are ensuring that the labels are applied based on the hierarchy and at the end of the life cycle of the document. We also negotiated quite hard with our IT colleagues to make sure that the creation of Microsoft Teams, as in Teams, is combined with the EDMS solution, because we were afraid that we're going to get to a stage where people have lots of Teams which they use every day and have an EDMS solution which doesn't combine with their Teams, and they're going to store documents in both places, which would obviously cause us problems in the long term. So as it stands, whilst the project is finishing, any request for creation of a team is done by the project team based on the records management function, and making sure that all the records management principles are brought into Teams and SharePoint from the start, so that people are always using the same environment. So that was one of the things that we appreciated on that one. In terms of file plans, we decided to create a file plan incrementally. So rather than spending a lot of time figuring out how our file plan was going to be when it was finished, we decided to approach teams on either section by section or business area basis and create this and incrementally add to our file plan. This is again based on the service areas and the functions that they perform for the organization, and we're underneath that organizing everything under the specific functions. An example would be, we were trying to say that people would logically look for finance files within a finance area or finance folder within their structure rather than anywhere else. Donald makes a really good example where he says that everybody who has a modern kitchen has drawers in their kitchen, and somewhere along that kitchen there's probably a cutlery drawer, and that cutlery drawer is organized with a small tray. People know where to find the spoons, people know where to find the forks, and if we tried an organized EDMS and a similar principle, then it would be almost easier and familiar for people to adopt and use it. Whilst doing all of this, we were trying to aim at having one true copy of every document we have and making sure that our environment is compliant, is easily accessible, and also secure for our users. So in terms of the taxonomy, our setup starts, or at least is carried out in 3 stages. So firstly, we built from a term store, which has a taxonomy term set, which models the 3 levels of PKC's file plan schedule. And underneath that, if you're looking at that picture, we have a name of a team. So another example, I think, information governance, which is our service function. And that service function has a team, a Microsoft Teams team, and an associated SharePoint site. And beneath that, we've got 2 folder levels, one at level 1, which is a team channel if you're looking at team, and just a folder if you're looking at SharePoint. I'll show you that when I show you a live site. And this is where we have the default document library, which is associated with it. Underneath that, we have what we call a level 2, which is where the EDMS document metadata is applied. This is where we point out the associated file marker, which tells it what labels to be applied to that folder at the end of its life. It tells it what the EDMS disposition is, whether it's open or closed, and gives us the date when a file might be closed. And if you look at closed files, I'll be able to show you, you'll also be able to see the label that's applied to that file. Once we've done that, that generates a file plan, which is written into a master file plan, which is stored within our data librarian site. And we just add to it whenever we add a new term, every single time it syncs, and that's growing our file plan. Actual site creation is handled by a combination of a workflow and Azure functionality, which is used to generate the Microsoft Teams team and the SharePoint site based on the taxonomy that we'd have created in the term store. So at the end of the day, once our team has done the EDMS taxonomy, the file plan appears in the data librarian's area of the SharePoint, and then they just have a tool that they use to pick whatever service function they want to create or change, and that sends a workflow to Azure, and that generates a team and a site, and all the sort of retention labels and all other things that go with the metadata are then in place, and the team is ready to be used by the people that need it. In terms of a team site, hopefully I'll be able to show you a team site shortly. Obviously, the site structure is based on what was generated in the term store with the associated metadata. We've designed it so that you can see all your documents in one place. Our old one, the 2010 and the 2016 version, when we closed files at the end of their life, it picked the folders and the files and put them in a different SharePoint collection, which meant if you were looking for a closed file, you had to go and look in a different place. Whereas the new one, we've made sure that everything is in the same place, and you just toggle the views so that you have the view of your live files as they are, and you have a view of your closed files, which are currently being retained for however long they're being retained for. And at the end of their life cycle, if they've been disposed of, then they disappear from view altogether. The file markers are a taxonomy field which is anchored into the file plan term in the EDMS document metadata set, and all files automatically inherit the metadata of the location they reside to. So if you think of my example earlier, if we had finance folder at the top level, and within a finance folder we had an invoices, contracts, tenders, and so on and so forth, each one of them would have an associated retention label, and that would be inherited, and any files that are stored in there and closed in that place would just inherit that and have the label for those applied. And in terms of closing files, this is probably the only bit of custom code that's been done in this, where we've incorporated a button that allows people to either close or reopen files as and when it's appropriate for them. And at the point of doing that, that applies the metadata and applies the retention label. the workflow that takes on the closing tasks applies a predetermined label based on the file's location, and then at that point triggers the retention schedule. I can see a question there about E5 licenses. So we're only licensed E5 for the data librarians, which is a set of, I think, 5 people who actually do the disposition. The workflow itself is also licensed as an E5 because it's the workflow that's applying the label rather than the users, if that makes sense. Okay, I'll carry on from there, Melody. So the retention then kicks in when the label is applied onto the file or folder, and it just gets kept from then on until we get to the bit where disposition is meant to happen. And then disposition, as I was just saying there, is done by a group of people who have a role assigned to them as reviewers of the various retention labels that we have. I think at the moment we have 25 retention labels based on the years. Each one, I think we have, as an example, we have 1 year, 3 years, 5, 10, 15, 25, up to 100. And then we've got 2, one called permanent archive and one called permanent record, because SharePoint seems to treat anything you declare as a record as immutable. And we really didn't want everybody declaring every document as immutable from the start. So normal users are able to use the permanent archive label, which allows a disposition reviewer to actually apply the record label, which is the one that becomes immutable, and that's only applied to documents that are actually to be kept forever. And that's done by people who understand records management, and it's a controlled group rather than everybody being able to do that. Our disposition review at the moment is done manually. I hope in the future we are able to automate it, because looking at the last 2 years, the volume of files that come up for review is greater than the resources we'll be able to do. So I'm hoping that the technology will improve and we'll be able to write some sort of workflow that allows us to classify or at least point out standard files that can be disposition reviewed by the system rather than a human being just making the final decision, and then some which actually require somebody within the team to intervene and be able to do that. So that's hopefully coming in the future. And at the point of disposition, the group of disposition reviewers are able to relabel any documents with whatever label, whether it's this one needs an archivist view or dispose altogether, or apply the records keep forever label. So that's what we hope we will come to in the future. In terms of the things that I think of as future plans and challenges in our area, whilst we now have a system that's able to do end-to-end records management, we are dependent on users closing their documents at an appropriate time. And my biggest fear is we've designed a system that works, it's relatively simple and does what we need to do in terms of a records manager's perspective, but actually will it force people to say, I'm finished with that invoice or I'm finished with that report, and close it? Some teams are really good at doing that, some teams are not so good. So we're also hoping that in the future we'll invest in quite an extensive comms campaign to sort of train good behavior into our teams so that they recognize when and how they should close files. And we also hope to be able to use a bit of the technology to write something that will tell us or point out to us those teams that in a year or whatever the decided period is, haven't been able or haven't closed any files, so that we start targeting our messages to those teams. We're worried about the technology and the licensing risks. So will we at some point in the future all be required to have an E5 license to be able to apply the label? Whereas at the moment we're using a workflow to do that. Will that be seen as not being compliant in the future if Microsoft change the way that they do things? The other bit is if they change SharePoint altogether. So that's something that is a bit of a risk for us. And I was talking earlier about automation opportunities and looking whether disposition can be done by the system itself. We're also looking quite closely at implementing what Donald has done for the ROPA for the SCARs and our retention lists, so that that becomes a living document which we can share with the users of the system, which we can change as retention periods change or the business needs as and when. So we're hoping to be able to use a Microsoft list app to be able to do that and supply some of the detail that is not so easily spotted within our retention schedules. And we're hoping to be able to learn from everybody as everybody picks up and does their own systems and implements on the same platform as us. So hopefully that's also coming. So that's the bit about sharing and how we've done our EDMS. I'm going to now try and show you a bit of the things I was talking about. I'm going to start from the temp store into a demo site and then into disposition review, and hopefully quite quick. If there are any questions at this point, I can't see questions, so I'll just...
there are a couple which I can narrate to you whilst you sort out your next slides. Renee was asking, can anyone in the organisation create a team, or is it locked down for only admins to create a team?
It's locked down to admins, and not only just admins, we've locked it down to the records management function, because we want to make sure that it's created properly and is associated to EDMS. So that was probably one of the big challenges, because people just want to go off and create their bacon butties or whatever team they want to do on a day. So you have to request a team. Somebody has to look at it and ask you, what is it that you're going to keep in that team? What sort of documents are going to be there, and apply the appropriate document management metadata to that before you start using it.
Mm-hmm. And then we had another question asking, are you able to say anything about the tools used for migration, for example, from shared drives to SharePoint? And Donald, how important was protecting the metadata to you in the migration process?
Okay. I will take the migration tools ones first. So we've tried to use the built-in Microsoft SharePoint tool to do the migration. And because we're doing it on a team-by-team basis, it becomes relatively straightforward to do that. Where we're not using that, we are asking teams themselves. So we will go to a team, we will discuss how the folder structure is going to be, we will build it, we will apply all the retention things to it, and then take the responsibility towards the team and say to them, go and take from your P drive or your SharePoint side all the things that you need and migrate them yourself. Not even using the migration tools, just doing a drag and drop from SharePoint 2010 can be opened in Microsoft Explorer mode and drag it to a browser. So we're getting lots of help from individual users and teams in migrating their files. Was the other question to Donald?
Well, is it the metadata seems to now be a hot topic. So yes, so, I don't know if Donald will join in answering these ones. Yes, so how important was protecting the metadata to you during the migration process? And also, how do you manage the aggregations and metadata around? Well, it just says around those, but I've forgotten what we were talking about 2 minutes. So if Camo could remind us what it was exactly. But yeah, so basically, general inquiries as to how you managed with the metadata.
We didn't.
Nice, simple answer.
I suppose to add to Donald's answer, in our SharePoint 2010 environment, people had to add pieces of metadata onto files as they saved them. And our estimation was people were going to add probably at the most 3 fields of the metadata, and they were going to stop because it became too much work for them. So we've created, I think, only one content type, and it's an EDMS content type, and everything else is inherited from where the folders are stored within the folder structure. Donald, does that cover the bit that you would?
Yeah. Our important metadata is actually the folder structure and the name of the document or its title. That's what holds everything together.
Have you produced guidance for people on file names and folders names and all things? Naming conventions, that would be the word, wouldn't
it? We have existing guidance on naming conventions, but I think the most important thing we tell people is store things in the right place, because everything, as Donald says, is inherited from where you store.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to store an invoice in an FOI folder, then all your metadata belongs to the FOI folder rather than your finance folder. So our biggest thing is to say to people, build it logically in the same way that you don't keep your strainer in your fork drawer and you keep it in the other drawer. Make sure that you keep your forks with your forks and your knives with your knives.
That is all of the questions so far. So yes, so if you want to crack on with next, I'm sure if anybody's got any questions mulling away in their brains, feel free to pop them up.
Okay, so starting from where I began in a temp store. So this is our temp store management tool, and I'm going to work on the CDP demo site, which is the one that we use to show people how we do our team sites. So this is a team site. That's the name of the service function called CDP demo. If you look at the list, we have one for senior management and so on and so forth. So that's the team name and the function that is going to serve. And
sorry,
then within
interrupt. We're still seeing your other slides.
Oh.
Get rid of them.
I'll stop sharing and then I will start over again and share. I think that's screen 1. Is that screen quite small? It looks like how it looked in the...
That's right. At the moment, we're getting a kind of giant tunnel of ourselves.
Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking is. I'm going to... It's because I have everything opened in the same browser. Bear with me a second. I'll be able to switch it. Actually. Okay. Is that one better?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. So this is our taxonomy temp store. And at the moment, I'm quite far down the list because I was sharing it in the other screen where I'd primed it. And I'm just going to try and find the demo team I want to share with you. So here's my CDP demo site. Obviously, at the top level, that's every service area that we have currently set up. I think as it stands, we have something like 371 different teams set up in this environment. We had more in our SharePoint 2010, and as we complete that migration, this will be added to more. So in terms of the demo team, we were saying that this team performs a specific set of functions for the team. So they have something to do with the business support, they have something to do with communications, they have something in finance and health and safety, and so on and so forth. And within each one of those transactions, there's a breakdown of whether they deal with complaints, correspondence, and all of those things. And what we've done is where we have said that they deal with complaints, we've said that there's a complaints one, and in general, we want it available for users to be able to tag it. And we've applied a custom property to it and said that it has an associated Office 365 label, and that associated 365 label is 5 years and delete. It could have been 5 years and archive, or 5 years highlight to an archivist so they can make a decision about that. It really doesn't matter which one it was. You'd be able to do one of those ones. So that's that element of it. Once we have built this and applied all the labels to it, we're then able to go into this area, which is data librarians. As you can see, the site only has 17 members, but is actually used by about 5 of them. And within here, we have built in a workflow that does the provisioning, and that allows us to provision at a service function level, where we provision an entire site, at a level 1 level, where we provide based on a team adding the first folder, and at the second level, where as a team applying the subfolder, which is where we've said that the label will be done. So at that point, all the team do is pick whatever team they want to provision based on this list, which is basically being imported from the temp store, and that's what our file plan is built on. And they could choose any of this. If I can find the CDP one somewhere. So there's that one. And you'd be able to choose if it was new, it would provision it anew, but obviously it exists, and it does tell me that a SharePoint site and a team does exist for this particular one, and you'd be able to get into it. If I then go and open that team, so having seen how it's set up in the temp store and how we generated, once it's generated, it looks a bit like that. So that's all the temps that were in the temp store. And if I look at the business support, same transactional areas that they were doing in the business support. And from here on, it's basically up to a user to then store their information. At this point is a point where we would provide training to the end users, show them how to use it, and then release it to them. And if they are helping with migrating their own documents, we would get them to do the migration. All of this is sort of built-in standard SharePoint. Really the only special things about this that are not in the sort of standard SharePoint is that we have built in these 2 buttons which allow users to close their documents, and at the point of closure, that's when they go into a label being applied to them and retention starting at that level. And if they've previously closed them and for whatever reason under the sun, they need to reopen them, then they would be able to do that. The other thing I was talking about is at this level, we've made sure that you can see both your live work and your retained work. So if I'm looking at complaints, I should be able to toggle it even to my closed content, and that should show me any closed content that exists within this site. Although this folder has been closed in the past, at the moment it's empty. So I'll see if I can find one. The complaints. So here's where we have closed some files, and in some of them you will be able to see your retention labels listed there to see it's been closed and it's been kept for 5 years, and the 5 years will kick in, and then somebody will do a disposition review. I'm sure there is one somewhere that shows you the actual label. So there's an example there. It gives me the EDMS disposition as being closed. It gives me the date on which this document was closed. So I closed this earlier in view of this presentation, and it does tell me that it's to be kept for 5 years, and at the end of the 5 years, it will be deleted. At the end of the 5 years, one of the disposition reviewers will get an email saying a set of documents that were closed in February of 2018 are now ready for disposition, and they will be able to go into the Security and Compliance Center and do a disposition review on those documents. If I can find a link to that, and I'll see if I can share. So when this comes up, this is one based on a test label we did, I think, last year, if not the year before, which was using 20 years, and we wanted to model, or 25 years even, we wanted to model how we would do a disposition. The disposition reviewers just get a link. The link says, go there, and essentially it brings them to this list here, which would show them how many things are pending disposition and whatever action they have to take. It does take a bit of time loading. This is probably one of the bits I'm not impressed with. It does take a lot of time. I don't know whether it's because of the amount of data that's stored in it, or whether it's just because of my connection, but eventually it does come up. It's looking at, so there's nothing in the preserve ones that are available to be disposed of. But if there is a files that are available for disposition, you would usually be able to see them in that list. As I was saying earlier, our disposition at the moment is happening manually. So somebody in my team is currently going into this area, looking at any of the files that are pending and being able to dispose of them as and when they become available for disposition. So I think that covers how we have set up our EDMS. If there are any questions, I think at this point I'll try and stop and answer some of them. I can't see any questions in the chat. Is there anything that anybody would like to ask me at this point?
Everybody's been stunned into silence.
That's never helpful.
Anne's asking us, the close folder option looks really useful. How did you do that?
That's built in. I think it wasn't developed by us. We did bring in somebody to develop that functionality. It's basically a custom code using SharePoint SPFX, I'm told. Don't quote me on it. And all it does is allow us to tag the files as being closed and hide them from the user. And then in converse, if they want to reopen them, to do the same thing.
Joanne's asking, were there any issues with working with each team individually rather than a top-down approach by records managers?
Yes, in some ways. It's easier in some ways approaching individual teams and saying, what do you do for a living and what sort of records do you keep, and trying to hold their hands in making sure that everything is tagged with the right things. It takes time. It's a lot of time, and some people are resistant to it and will say, I know much better. I've been doing this for a lot more time than you have, and I think you should do it this way rather than this way. So there isn't really a perfect way of doing it. I prefer working from the ground up rather than imposing it on people. But it would have been quicker to just say, this is how it's going to be done, and that's it, and finish the project quicker.
We've got a couple of questions from Molly as well. How long do you keep your disposal log for those documents that have disposition review? And do you export your disposition and audit logs?
Yes, we have the intention of exporting them into an area where we can keep a tag of what we have disposed of. At the moment, we've only honestly been using this for a couple of years, and so far the only thing that we've had that's come up for disposition are things tagged with the 1-year label. But as time goes, our intention is to keep a log in the records management area of everything we've disposed of, and that's why I'm quite keen to use the list up more, because that's where I think that will help us in being able to keep a record of what's gone and where it belonged and what metadata it had at the time when it was disposed of.
We've got a question from Helen. So this looks great. I have a bit of an indirect question about the size of the team you have and your experience of how much time it takes to support teams, both with the transition and then the ongoing support.
When we started, we were doing various other projects that were part of this body of work. And I think there was 7 of us in the team. We're now down to about 4 people, which means it's taking even longer to do things. But we've had, I've been in this project now, I think this is my 3rd year, and I hope and plan to have it finished by the end of the next financial year. So give or take in about 4 or 5 years' time, we would have been able to do all of the SharePoint 2010 migration and all of the file servers, probably to about 80-90%, and leave some sort of guide for people to be able to carry on that work when the project element of it ends. I'm hoping that answers the question that was being asked.
Yep, it looks like Helen's grand with your answer. I don't think there's any more questions that haven't been answered. So unless anyone, something's popped. Yeah, it doesn't look as if there's any more questions. So yeah, I just want to say thank you both very much. It was really informative. I think the number of comments and questions that we got in the chat suggests that it wasn't just me that thought that. So yeah, it's always good to get that engagement. So thank you very much to the audience as well. If there's no other questions, I will thank you both and hand over to Shona to let you know about YouTube.
Yes, it's just a reminder to say that if you do want to revisit this, or obviously read any of the questions that you may have missed that have popped up and the answers that Donald and Khopolo have popped in there, they will be uploaded to the IRMS YouTube site, which we will also link in the IRMS Scotland site as well, so you'll be able to do that. It won't be instant, but keep an eye out and a link will appear. So that, I think, is us. The chat is pinging away, so let me just double check. There's nobody with any final great things. No, just lots of people saying thank you, very informative, which I would agree. I've got a page and a half of notes already, so it's very useful for me. So I think that is us. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. All right.